Welcome to Certain Point of View, your first step into a much nerdier world. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com. And now, your hosts, Ben Milton and Addy Thomas.
Hey Nerferders, I'm Addy Thomas. Don't worry, Ben Milton will be here for another episode of Certain Point of View. But right now, I'm just introducing the episode. We recorded it just recently with a couple of our buddies from Nrdly podcast, Geof and Colin. We had a ton of fun with them. We were talking about Marvel and sort of how characters with certain fates influence the way they were written. We had a great discussion with them, and we're going to get to that episode in just a little bit. But before we get there, I just wanted to remind you about what we're doing on Patreon and the fact that you can actually join the podcast and help us if you're enjoying the podcast. What Patreon is, it's, you can give a little bit of money per episode based on whatever you'd like and even cap it at a certain amount per month. So, in case we do like 70 episodes in 1 month, you don't take, 70 times whatever your per episode donation is, and it doesn't suddenly take away all your, take away your mortgage payment all of a sudden. All of that, you can see what you can do to be a part of that. There's special perks that we're also making a part of that, something we're just getting started, and only if that's something if you'd like to do, if you feel you'd like to be a part of what we are doing as part of a certain point of view. Of course, we absolutely appreciate you still listening to the podcast completely for free. Just share it with your friends and other fellow nerds that you think would enjoy it. You can find out all about Patreon and how to share the podcast. Just go to our website, certainpov.com. And for now, let's go ahead and join our recording of me and Ben hanging out and talking to Geof and Colin Kirby over from Nrdly.net. Make sure to check out their podcast at Nrdly.net and RDLY.net and have fun with the podcast. Thanks for joining us. We got the guys from Nrdly hanging out with us. How you guys doing?
Excellent.
We're fantastic. Thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, how was your holidays?
They were all right. That seems like a weird thing to say. Usually everybody's like, oh, yeah, it's great. It was good. Like, nothing special, but Ben, you?
I didn't hate them.
Yeah.
which is an accomplishment for you, because you usually hate everything.
I'm generally a hater on everything, but these were okay.
I was sort of indifferent this year.
Were you pretty much like in your room under the covers with a flashlight reading comics the whole time?
Oh, I wish.
That would have made it a good holiday.
That would have made it a great holiday.
Man, that's not possible.
Yeah, I know that feel.
Yeah, it's it's great. It's a lot of fun with kids, but it's exhausting with kids too at the same time. So
yeah, definitely,
it's sort of a two-edged sword. I enjoy it. I love my kids, and it makes the holiday special. You see it through their eyes a little bit, and it just kind of like brings the magic back in some ways. Like, my kids were really into Polar Express this year.
Nice.
So we sat and watched Polar Express and read the books and listened to the music. Addy's rolling his eyes at me right now, but I actually kind of like it. I like it. Yeah, I like Polar Express.
We grew up with our dad reading the Polar Express on Christmas Eve every year, so it's kind of a yearly tradition for us.
And watching Elf.
Cool. Oh yeah, and Elf after Will Ferrell came out with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I like Eight Crazy Nights. That's like one of my favorite. That's my go-to.
I have never seen that movie ever.
Oh, it's so funny.
That's what I hear.
Funny. It's so funny. It's the best thing. It's the best holiday movie right after A Christmas Story.
Oh, thank God! I was hoping you weren't going to say It's a Wonderful Life.
No, no, I hate It's a Wonderful Life.
I love the concept and I love the story, but I can't get behind the film. I don't like it at all.
I kind of want to dig deep into this now. Like, what don't you like about It's a Wonderful Life?
Forget
It's
Marvel.
because I have no soul.
Let's talk about Geoff's It's a Wonderful Life hate.
See, I love quoting lines from It's a Wonderful Life. Just because Jimmy Stewart is so awkward.
I don't know any lines to quote.
This guy.
Yeah.
I've only seen it once,
good.
and I think that half the time I was on Facebook
Oh,
or Instagramming about how much I hated it.
this guy. What?
I know.
Why have I not walked out on you?
I feel like it's a measure of how much of a heart you have, but we'll move on from that.
Yes. Okay, so what do you guys want to talk to us about today?
So yeah, we're talking about specifically Marvel characters, since we're doing this crossover episode with you guys, and you guys are focusing on Marvel with this season of your show. So we decided to talk about some of our favorite characters in Marvel that have a little bit more of not a religious slant, but have a more specific religious viewpoint. I think a lot of comics characters are a little bit more nebulous when it comes to like whether or not they're religious in any way. I think there's an interesting website out there that like lists every like comic character and what they're supposed like down to like what Christian denomination they may be part of, or if they're whatever other religion that they're associated with. I think there's something out there that says like Batman is Lutheran. I don't know how
I don't know how you make that connection. But.
I would think after his adventures, he would try to get rid of that term. I don't know.
Right.
Be like, excuse me, I'm Protestant. Well, I don't use that word here.
Right.
But why? Because I'm Batman. Where is she? Sorry. Where is Mary?
Where's the Virgin Mary? I'm sorry, that's terrible. All right, I'm done.
Everyone's got to do their Batman impression. It's like,
That's
I
true.
think it's a required thing, especially for nerd podcasters.
Oh, for sure.
Well, with some characters though, we do have a little bit more of a specific, like we know that Matt Murdock as Daredevil, it has a Catholic background.
Yep.
And
Right.
that is, with Frank Miller, especially when he really brought the character to popularity, he really infused a lot of his Catholic background into the character.
Yeah.
We're also going to talk, Nightcrawler as well. Nightcrawler in the animated series had a very, a great episode.
He was a monk, wasn't he? When they found him.
Yeah, he was living in a monastery when they found him, because I think he took refuge there, and he did have a sort of a strong faith. Was also like kind of a key discussion point, a key theme in that episode.
Well, let's talk about Nightcrawler for a minute, because Nightcrawler was very important and influential for me because, and I think I've mentioned this before on our show. When I was a kid and I was watching X-Men, I mean, I'd already read the comics and my parents were a little iffy on the whole X-Men thing. So I sat down with my dad and he was going to watch an episode and determine whether it was cool or not. In the episode that we found was the one that we watched was the one where Nightcrawler kind of helps Wolverine on a journey towards redemption for the things that he's done over the course of his life. And it was really cool because I remember specifically the episode ending with, or there was a scene at least with Wolverine sitting down to actually like read the Bible.
Right.
And I thought that was such a cool thing. And that really helped for me solidify that, I can be spiritual and I can be into these things, which kind of goes back to what we talked about on the History of Marvel episode on our show, of, Marvel really setting the tone for comic books, for generations beyond, specifically with a team like the X-Men, which brought adult issues.
Yeah, for sure. You can't really talk about comic books and you can't really talk about these heroes without sort of invoking spiritual ideas. It is a mythology, and as such, like you're going to be covering a lot of the same kind of sort of issues that you get in from traditional religion. And Addy and I have talked about this. Like this, Star Wars and comic books and all this stuff has kind of replaced that in modern society, like where we used to have Greek mythology and these idyllic human-esque creatures, battling in the skies over trivial stuff. It has really kind of just morphed itself into this is where we are now, and this is what that's come into. And, I love Nightcrawler. I love his devotion to Catholicism, even though his whole struggle as a mutant, he's so hideous. He looks like a demon, and he's got like this really bizarre power. And yet, his religious views kind of help ground him and keep him in the real world. Whereas it's very, very easy to take that character and make him into something that's just not relatable at all.
Well, that's sort of an interesting thing. You mentioned, his appearance and his religious beliefs. I think actually, and I don't know if you guys can back me up on this one. I recall hearing something to the effect that Nightcrawler's powers. There's the brimstone. That's sort of a result of his teleporting, and that supposedly when he teleports, that he is in hell for a moment and then he comes back into our reality as well. I don't. Is that like canon now, or is that a
No, that is true. I believe his father is also Azazel. I don't know if you guys remember that. He's basically a red version of Nightcrawler. He's an older
right. He was in X-Men First Class, right?
He was, yes. And Azazel was known as a Nephilim. Funny, they pull things out of like the Book of Enoch, extra biblical texts. Yeah, there's a whole mythology behind the Nephilim and Azazel himself. That he shared a night with Mystique in Germany, and that was the result of Nightcrawler was the result of that.
Well, okay. I don't know if it wasn't Mystique, because you're getting crossed with the original origin that they wanted for Nightcrawler, which was that Mystique, using her powers of shape-shifting, became a man and slept with somebody, I forget who, and that birthed Nightcrawler. But Azazel actually had a relation with a
was it a human woman?
I think it was a human woman. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could.
And after some kind of flip flopping around, because nobody wanted him as a child, he ended up as a surrogate son for a sorceress in a carnival in Germany.
I do remember that part. He was born to a lower lord, a noble, in Germany. I know that, and he was immediately given up because the Lord saw, this child and was like, "Oh my God, this is definitely not my baby."
Blue demon baby.
Yeah, yes. This is definitely not my child. What is going on?
Papa, don't preach.
You don't need Maury for that for that verdict.
He's calling out Martin Luther. Excuse me. I hear you deal with these things.
But yeah, I mean, his genesis and how he becomes who he becomes as an adult is really interesting when you go through all the different experiences that he had growing up.
Right. And he could, and I wanted to say this earlier too, he could be used easily as a character kind of against religion. He could be used in a negative light, but instead he was so positive. Even with the hardship he faced growing up, he understood, this is who I am, this is what I am, but my faith is still in Christ. My faith is in Christ alone, and I will do whatever it takes to better the people's lives around me. And no matter the cost. I mean, you see Nightcrawler through the years as he grows even in the X-Men, and he becomes a great leader. And I think that is owed in part to his faith.
Because it grounds him. Again, I go back to the idea that specifically grounds that character and makes him relatable. It brings it home to a lot of people where we can say, okay, it's easy to make a mutant and say, well, they have all these incredible powers and they can do all these amazing things. It's another trick altogether to keep that character identifiable outside of just, well, they're an outsider and I feel like an outsider too. And I think that's sort of the magic trick that they've done, using religion in this character's case to keep him grounded, to keep him real, and keep him relatable in the same way that the Greeks did with Zeus and the Christians did with Jesus, where they made him human as well as God, so that he has this little bit of reality in him, so that you feel like, okay, well, he understands what I'm going through. He understands that the trouble that I'm dealing with. He's tempted too, and because that's really to me, that's still at the end of the day, these are all make-believe characters, and so we have to find a way to internalize them to teach us what the lesson is. And if we can't relate to them, forget it. It's just this weird Superman story.
Right. And I like how you're talking about, mythology. This is really our modern mythology. These are our Greek heroes, our demigods. And I would say, comic books, as well as more so nowadays video games in our current state, are definitely a mythology. And it's kind of funny how we always reach for that, isn't it? We always reach for some mythical, wonderful, strong people.
Well, this idealized version of whatever that person, that one idea is of, that single-mindedness, struggle idea of like I'm overcoming this one thing and fighting against all odds to do this one thing, which you see like littered throughout mythology.
Which I think is it's a fascinating sort of development in mythology, because very often we kind of associate mythology automatically with like this is what dictates a certain set of religious beliefs, but now we're sort of seeing like, all right, how do we tangle with science as part of our culture? How do we tangle with faith as part of our culture in our own mythology? Because I think it examines the purpose of mythology, and that's to answer the questions of why the world is the way it is, rather than necessarily be, necessarily blind and dogmatic. A blind and dogmatic set of rules and regulations. So I think it's a really cool development that we're going back to science. Not science. We're going back to storytelling as not just an art, but also as a way of explaining the world around us. It's cool because it's interesting because you were talking about the big mythical figures, and DC is usually the one associated with that, and Marvel the more flawed characters, and of course now both houses have adopted kind of the flawed characters as much as they can, and try to fit that as much into those characters as best as they can, just because it's so much more relatable. But Marvel has just had a longer track record of it, and seeing it with these kind of characters, specifically a character like Nightcrawler, really just shows what kind of storytelling you can do and just how complex and relatable you can get with these characters.
Well, if you want to talk about, we're all talking about kind of the flawed aspects of demigods and gods and mythology and in comic books here, which we've stated as our modern mythology. If there's one character that's got some flaws in him, it's got to be Magneto.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Magneto, I feel I would put him probably in my top 4 comic book superheroes of all time as just a character. Eric Lenscher is, and that's one of his names that he's gone by. But Eric he's the ultimate anti-hero. He's gone from a murderer of mutants and humans to the leader of the X-Men.
Yeah.
In a year's time. And in the films, he's gone from, you see it's very much focused on his Holocaust survivor status in especially the First Class kind of universe. It's just incredible because it's someone who is dealing with, yes, the extra kind of scientific powers that he possesses, but he also is dealing with something that literally millions of people were affected and destroyed by.
All because of his of
who he was,
family religion, and
something he
faith.
could not control.
Yeah. Something he was born into.
Right. And you can't help but understand, or you can't help but think of, that's probably why he is the way that he is when he's a villain, though. He can't control that he has these powers. Mutants cannot. And so to him, he's trying to prevent this new Holocaust of mutants from happening. And that's what always...
But he inadvertently became
the cause.
What he was trying to prevent.
Correct.
Well, I think there's some more debate to that, though, because as a character, if I remember, at the end of the Axis event, he talks to Xavier's spirit at one point, and Xavier pretty much says that Magneto was right all along. And I think that says something. Actually, I think in a very different way, faith in their causes. Those two characters. It's hard to talk about one of those characters without talking about Xavier and Magneto together, just because that relationship is so key to X-Men mythology. But you have sort of Magneto really embracing himself in every way. He really embraces who he is as a mutant. He really embraces his background. He's not willing to shake off necessarily the what he's seen in the past and try to move forward in a more positive light. Whereas Xavier has witnessed plenty of hurt as well. Maybe not to the same degree as Magneto, but still has some sort of positive outlook on where the future is headed. But Magneto embraces every little bit of his identity, and his faith in some ways. But in the course of that, goes down a much darker path. I think that's a. Do you think there's maybe something about sort of a more dogmatic commitment to his identity, and that includes his faith, that causes that sort of more extremist, personality and philosophy with Magneto?
I think that, I mean, obviously his worldview is shaped by his origin story, right? And, I've always kind of pictured him sort of like as the Moses character of that mythology, of sort of like he has this like kind of weird troubled upbringing, but he's also the guy who's kind of like reluctantly leading people out of this situation, but his character flaws alone keep him from reaching his final goal. His anger and his frustration with the people that he's leading and the people that he's dealing with ultimately are his downfall, which is very Moses-like from a mythology standpoint and from a lesson standpoint. And that's how I always viewed him, as sort of like just as a Moses character.
That's an interesting perspective. I never actually heard that. I never really would have thought of that otherwise, because Moses really was a flawed character as well. And like you were saying, he was very much shaped by his origin. I don't know. I really like that connotation. I never actually thought of that.
Yeah, it's a great comparison.
It's an interesting analog, especially when you consider how many of Moses' people also lost belief in him and, in a way, died at his hand too. And that's very integral to Magneto's character. Is that he's Magneto, obviously, we see it as he's willing to sacrifice anyone for the cause. I don't know if you can argue that necessarily for Moses when you've got like a bunch of people swallowed up by a pit when they decide not to go with what God commands.
Yeah.
But some people.
Or just leading them around in the desert for 40 years.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there was that story where Magneto just walked around the desert for 40 years, right?
I think they call it Genosha.
Yeah.
Okay, which, can I just say this real quick? Avengers versus X-Men, I mean, it was a wonderful series, but I really appreciated Magneto's kind of position in there at the time. Just in that situation where he was so different than where he had started out. At this point, he is right alongside Cyclops leading the X-Men, in the wake of this insane situation. And then obviously we have the new, Phoenix.
Right.
But he had come a long way, and I'm not sure currently where he is in the comics. I'm not sure where he is, like, whether it's spiritually or morally. I'm not sure where he is.
Reading Magneto,
The Cullen Bunn series, yeah.
Yeah.
and it was really good. And he was weakened and sort of disillusioned, but yet also like resolute in his task of like leading mutants again and protecting mutants again. And wasn't quite so willing to just get rid of anybody in his way, or like use people as pawns or use mutants as pawns so much as he was just like really militaristic in his view of what he needed to do, and he would just do it personally. He's a fascinating character, absolutely fascinating. He is probably my favorite character in all of comics, just because like what you said, Colin, which is he's so malleable. You can use him in so many different ways, and learn so many different things from him.
Well, and immediately following that, you've got his role in the new Civil War series in Civil War II, where he literally flips on the other side again. Sides with he sides with Iron Man, and Storm's team goes with Captain Marvel. Is that right?
Yeah.
And, but again, it's interesting, too, that he's joined by Nightcrawler and some other members of the original X-Men. So it's like he's just this weird dichotomy character shaped immensely by his origin. I mean, out of all the characters that I've seen in the Marvel Universe, I think Magneto is the one that is most tied to his origin throughout the entirety of his life.
Well, and I think, too,
it rules him even to this day.
Well, and I think that's part of the dichotomy as well, is he understands there's a part of him that understands that he shouldn't be ruled by his past.
But yet he is.
But yet he is, right.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy of Magneto, ultimately, in my opinion. He's not a doomed character, I don't believe.
No, he's a tragedy in the way of like a Shakespearean tragedy almost.
Right. And I think he's incredibly relatable. I said that earlier. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I think he's incredibly relatable because he was shaped by such a horrific real-world event. We can visualize his pain, what he went through. And it's not hard, or it's not easy, but it's not incredibly difficult also to relate with him. Because
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of goes back to like what I was also saying about Nightcrawler, in that these religious touchstones that they put into these characters' backgrounds make them relatable. Like you can relate, like everybody can kind of understand a Holocaust survivor's perspective of fear and not wanting to relive or see that experience happen to them or to anybody else.
Yeah, and it was a brilliant move in the creation of characters like Nightcrawler and Magneto to use their faith tangle that faith in with their origin story and how they became who they are, and how they continue forward, because especially at the time that these characters were created, just about everybody had some sort of a connection to a faith or a religion. Especially in America, there was a time where, everybody just went to church, whether they were extremely devout or not, remains to be seen, but just about everybody went to church. It was like, if you don't go to church, then what kind of heathen are you?
Or synagogue.
Or synagogue, yes.
Excuse me, Geoff, we're diverse here.
What?
We're diverse here.
Shut up. Dumbass.
Are you telling me that Magneto just randomly became a Christian when he went to America?
No, I'm... Shut up.
It's a Christian nation, man.
That's very true.
It's God's country.
Speaking of God's country, Hell's Kitchen, huh? I'm sorry, that was quite the transition, right?
Which brings us to our next hero on the list, which is Daredevil. And I don't think that there's any way that you can talk about Daredevil without talking about his Catholic roots and how that shapes him and spurns him forward in his quest for vengeance as well. In much a similar way that it shapes Nightcrawler's view of the world, and not quite in the same way that it shapes Magneto's, but it certainly shapes Matt Murdock's view of the world and his view of justice and what needs to happen in Hell's Kitchen. And it's such a defining characteristic for that character. I find it fascinating because the art and of Daredevil sitting on a gargoyle and stuff like that is so ingrained into that story of who he is and what he's doing. More so than any other character, in my opinion, is religion front and center.
Well, that was one of my favorite aspects of season 1 of the Netflix series with Daredevil, was his relationship with his priest and those very quiet character moments that you got to relish in, where he had those conversations with his priest, where he every superhero has the moments where they doubt their mission, but the way that he sort of struggles with his mission and with his faith adds an extra dimension that we typically don't see, because you always have sort of like, Batman's famous for the not crossing the line of killing his I was about to say victims, but his enemies.
His enemies.
Yeah.
Unless the henchman can die.
Yes.
Totally okay.
But every most characters tend to have that line. Obviously, the antiheroes are more willing to cross that line.
Cough, cough, Punisher, cough, cough.
Right.
We'll get to him in a sec.
But I think what's fascinating with Daredevil is that background is so integral to his questions about his identity and his purpose, and that it makes him willing to consider is what he's doing, whether or not that's truly justifies, if he's justified in his mission as Daredevil.
Especially with, how he was brought up. Okay, so his origin, like we understand how he was blinded, with the chemicals in his eyes. But then his father, battling Jack Murdoch, is a famous fighter, and he goes down after he doesn't throw a fight. He's killed by the gangs. And that, from a very young age, Matt understands kind of the real situation that his home, Hell's Kitchen, is in. He has no, delusions, none of that. He understands, the worst of the worst. And, yeah, his mission comes into doubt, but at the same time, for him, it's it has to be me. From his origin comic, I think when he's taken down, the guy that had him killed, what was his name, Sweeney or something like that, is the fat guy. And he's running after him, and his heart finally gives out. And he's like, "You're not a man, you're a devil." He's wearing the yellow and black suit, the horrible yellow and black suit.
Just the god awful garish striper crap.
Ooh, man. With the red horns, too. Oh, man. It's like Michael Sweet. And if Michael Sweet is listening, I love Striper, but
You guys are awesome.
yeah. Anyways, but he takes that branding and he not only runs with it, he takes it in stride and he takes that upon himself as the mantle. It's almost like, this is going to sound like kind of a bit of a stretch. He takes it almost as it's his cross, it's his crucifix. I will be that devil. I will be the one to take all of this on. And yeah, I'm risking myself. I don't know truly where my faith stands in accordance with this, but I have to do it.
He feels it's his calling,
Right.
and his purpose.
I kind of think he does know where his faith stands with it, but he's willing to take that punishment if it means he's the savior of Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, that's true. Okay,
In a sense,
you're right.
he has a messianic complex almost.
You're true.
Not almost. It's a complete messianic complex. He's the devil of Hell's Kitchen. He's the savior of Hell's Kitchen. He's the one, the man without fear, standing up against organized crime and corruption.
Without fear.
Like the 6 blocks radius of Hell's Kitchen. He's completely insane, and he uses his religion as a justification to do it. That's how I see it. This guy's nuts. He's every bit as nuts as Batman is, except for there's a religious fanaticism added to it, which makes him even more frightening in a lot of ways.
I can see that, and you see how he works or doesn't work well with a lot of other people, and I think that could be attributed to that reason, Ben.
Yeah, completely.
You see how he kind of his weird on and off partnership with Elektra. Every now and then, his interactions with Spider-Man, the other superheroes that inhabit New York, it's very interesting because he doesn't work well with others, and I think it lends credence to your idea or not your idea, but the
concept of his messianic complex.
Right, his insanity, but it works.
Well, it works well for him.
Yeah, it works well for him within that 6 block radius.
Exactly. You get him outside of that 6 blocks, and he's a fish out of water because it's not that's not his mission. That's not his mission field.
Yeah,
Right.
And so he's completely out of his element in that result. He's okay. I'm trying to I'm just from a purely a standpoint of spirituality and what are we learning from this specific ideal, which crazy Greek or Hindu god would you what is he representing? That's my thing about Daredevil. He's a fine character. He has some interesting stories, but he's not really. He doesn't really bring anything new to the table that we haven't seen from a mythology standpoint that many other heroes don't bring that have already brought. And I know David Dickerson, who's a big fan of ours on our show and has been on our show a couple times, is probably gonna send me hate mail over this. But
it's not like you're not used to hate mail, Ben.
no, it comes every day from somebody.
Usually it's me with different names.
And you're sitting right next to him when he sent it.
Something that I wanted to bring up. Kind of looking at all 3 of these characters, and these are just 3 characters within the comic book universe, specifically Marvel, that have had dealings with religion or have their own personal faith. I mean, there's tons of others. But I find it really interesting if you look at all 3 of these characters, they're all deeply flawed individuals who are striving to be better and who are searching and, in the case of Daredevil, have found their calling and their purpose. And but they're flawed, and they live in these dichotomies in their minds and in their hearts. And it's very interesting to me that if you go and you read like the Christian Bible and you look at all of the major players and all of the major characters in the Bible, okay, we brought up Moses earlier. You've got David, you've got all these, Judas, you've got all these people in the Bible that are all deeply flawed individuals who live in these dichotomies between, Paul said it best, I think, in the New Testament, where he said, I do the things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that I do want to do, or that I need to do, oh, woe is me. And that is the human condition right there, Right. And it's so, nowhere is it more blatant, I think, today in modern culture than in these comics, in the stories of Daredevil and Nightcrawler and Magneto and all the others. And that to me is what makes them so relatable, is that we are Magneto. I am Daredevil. I am Magneto.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves there.
Well,
Geoff.
no, I'm just saying, and you are too, we're all flawed. We all have our perfections and our weaknesses, and it's a brilliant way to construct stories, and that lends itself to well to the concept of comic books, and comic book culture is our modern day mythology. There are Zeuses and our Heras and Thors and everything. Oh, Thor was a bad example because there really is a Thor, but
you don't know much about mythology, do you? Come on.
Shut up.
Yeah, I prefer not to think that I'm Daredevil. I like to think I'm Groot, but
Yeah,
I guess we all have our limitations.
Dude, I can totally see that. Maybe Baby Groot. I don't know.
Dancing Baby Groot.
Yes,
I'll go with
the
that.
cutest version.
That's good because Ben is kind of a Rocket type character.
Oh God.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So you guys are a partnership that could literally blow up the universe.
There we go. I like that.
I like that. That's so applicable. It worked.
Here's what you need to do for your
We'll
next.
embrace it.
Here's what you need to do, like for show artwork or something. At some point, get a picture of Rocket like on Groot's shoulder or something, and you need to swap faces.
Yeah. Just Photoshop your faces on and make it look as crappy as possible, so that it just ups the humor value. Like our year-end, like our New Year's Eve or New Year's episode that we did last year, where it was just really awful.
That's true.
It worked.
It does.
I've been wanting to get art of Ben as Palpatine. I feel like that that really embraces who he is.
Something
Just
dark side.
Here's what you need to do: just mix Ben, like do like the face morph. Where you mix two faces together. Yes. Mix Ben's face with John McCain, and it works. I think it'll work.
I assume that would still look like Ben, but I think
or Ben. Oh my God. Or George Senior. You could do that. You could do
right.
George Soros.
Oh God.
I actually want to go back to one thing though. We talked about a little bit. Actually, Ben, you were talking about Daredevil, and his messianic complex, and you're talking about he's absolutely crazy. Let me ask you this. So, and it's part of him being a religious fanatic. I know Moon Knight has been played a couple different ways, but do you think the religious, sort of that aspect, the moon god aspect of Moon Knight, do you think that Daredevil is just as crazy as that sort of schizophrenic Moon Knight?
If you go and you
look at holding to Khonshu,
you go and you look at some of the because his origin story has been retconned so many freaking times,
right?
And if you go and you look at some of the different origin stories and kind of where the series went from each of those different ones, he definitely. I mean, one thread that I felt is consistent is his borderline personality disorder that he's got. Because he's got that crazy side. He comes up with so many different alter egos and. Trying to kill himself off, so he can be a normal individual, but then he has to come back to Daredevil, which means he's back to being who he was. And, I think he is crazy. But like we said earlier, it works, he's psychotic. He definitely is. Cause you'd have to be in order to do what he does within that 6-block radius of Hell's Kitchen.
He's the man without fear. He has no fear, not only because he believes he's on a religious mission, but because he's psychotic enough to believe that. Or he may be. He may, and see, that's where I think that Marvel's success.
You have to be you have to live in a certain stage of psychosis in order to have zero fear.
Well, yeah,
Well,
to
then,
do what he does.
but I will
let me ask
say-
you this: is there a line that that divides sort of the religious fanaticism of Daredevil and maybe the religious devotion of Nightcrawler?
I think there is, because with Nightcrawler, I don't know. It seems very close. It's closed off with him. Like, you know who he is. He's very upfront. He is a positive person as much as he can be. He's very devout in his faith.
Well,
obviously
I think,
Matt is as well.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no. I was just gonna say Matt is also, he's a killer as well. And I was about to say, they leave Daredevil so open ended because you don't know if it truly is more of a religious cause or psychosis that's just driven him to this. You don't know.
And you bring up an interesting point, kind of comparing the fanaticism and the devotion, between Daredevil and Nightcrawler. But you got to think, you have to think about who Nightcrawler is, okay? The difference between the two of them is the fact that Daredevil, Matt Murdock, is human. He can turn off the Daredevil and walk down the street and nobody bats an eye. And you look at Nightcrawler and he can't do that for years and years after the verbal abuse and degradation that he's gotten over, the course of his life. His only thing that he had to turn to was his devout faith. He had to be devoted to the faith, because otherwise what else would he have? And you know what I mean? Until he met the X-Men and then joined the X-Men. And over the course of time, I think that he doesn't become less devout, but his emotional and psychological well-being becomes less dependent upon being as devout of a Catholic, as he has been, because he comes to the realization that his looks don't matter. That's the biggest hurdle, for him. And I think it's kind of, in a way, unfair to compare the two, in their different practices of their faith, because for that one simple reason,
And that's
Matt Murdock is a human and Nightcrawler is not. And the things that Matt has, he takes for granted compared to Nightcrawler, because he doesn't have access like that. He can't just walk down the street and go to the store.
You think then that it's fair to say that people's own, like in the real world, our own interactions with religion are much more individually based on our own experiences, our own perceptions, our own realities, than just like a denomination or even a church.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, you don't come to, like I have a really close friend of mine who grew up in a Christian home, and he's now an atheist. And, his religious journey and experiences are based on, or like where he stands, with his religion is based on his own life experiences, not based on the fact that he grew up in a Christian household. He made his own decision. Everybody makes their own decision. Whether they are conscious of them making that decision. Like, I know people who just go to church because that's what's expected of them. They grew up that way, but they still make that conscious decision to go to church. They, now that they're adults, they know they have the option not to, but they choose to, and yeah, I mean, kind of as humans, here in the real world, our interaction with religion and with faith is deeply individual and deeply personal. I really don't believe that there is just kind of this general hive mind mentality of, I'm a Christian because I was raised up in a Baptist house, or, you know what I mean?
Well, it does exist.
It does, yeah. But I think after you hit a certain age point in your life, and everybody does this, you then choose to make your own decisions. You choose to continue going to your Baptist church. You choose to continue going to synagogue. You choose to continue going to, temple or whatever your religion is, or you choose not to do any of those things and choose not to have a religion. I mean,
I see it more as a maturity issue than an age issue. I think it's very easy for some people to go to church, get caught up in that culture, and then just stay stagnant in that culture and in that church.
I agree, Ben.
And then it'll grow, and it just it's easy because that's where their friends are, that's where
Right. Well, yeah.
stuff like that. And the church, a lot of churches aren't interested in growing as long as those donations continue to kick on every Sunday. Then it's real easy to just kind of stay there. The thing that I love about and to bring it back to comics, right? Like sort of like just veering off into our own critique of the church Christianity, and we can send this to Relevant Magazine. Is that I think that the great thing about this is that we're talking about comic book characters, and we're talking about these gods and these idealized people. And we're able to have that conversation. We're able to transition that into a conversation about, like, well, gosh, like this is actually kind of a critique on our own modern society. My question that I was thinking about as we were talking about, Daredevil and his religious extremism, if you will, like, how do we view that in terms of ISIS or what's happening in other militant branches of Islam?
Yeah, it's funny because it's very easy for me to look at Daredevil because I don't know if I 100% agree with you on sort of the religious fanaticism of Matt Murdock. I think it is I personally think it's more of a way that he copes with his identity, but maybe a character that I think we can agree definitely is more on sort of that religious extremism is a Magneto, just because of the nature of maybe. It feels like his character is really built around the idea of like one man's freedom fighters, another man's terrorist, So I think it, and I think it's we started having actually that discussion a little bit with Rogue One, but I think it's interesting to bring Magneto into that picture, and just about honestly, you can make that discussion with any superhero because they are working outside of the confines of the law typically. So yeah, I mean that's a tough discussion to have, but I think the thing is though, the problem I have with equating though religion to that always, yes, we often see religion as sort of a motivating factor for terrorism, but I don't think it's exclusive to that. Especially, sort of on the American front where you do have, the Klan, or, you do have, atrocities committed by atheistic or agnostic civilizations that or for for the idea of the advancement of science.
So yeah, the mistake that causes like that confusion is mistaking the atheistic view of like, okay, yes, there's not a quote unquote religion, but they treat their government as a religion, or they treat science as with just as much devotion as anybody, as somebody else might treat their quote-unquote religion.
Right.
It's just what are you devoting your energy to, and what are you devoting your attention to? You can make anything into a religion. And that's just such an easy cop out to be like, well, atheists never,
Just look at the 20th century and how many people died from scientific advances in World War I and all of that centuries.
Look at how many people died from. Communist civilizations in the 20th century alone, which communism has no room for religion.
Right.
The state is the religion, religion, faith, Christianity, all of it, Judaism, it all holds the state back. It holds the people back.
Absolutely.
From this classless society.
And even out of sort of philosophical viewpoint of it, I mean, Stalin is the perfect example of that actually in action. So it's not just theory. We do have actual
examples in history, recent history too.
Exactly.
And even bear with me on this. Even Adolf Hitler, I think we can see as almost a Magneto because he grew up in a World War I, post-World War I world. He watched the world change in such a short amount of time, in such a large way, so much death surrounding him. And afterwards, his country, which really didn't even start the war,
was blamed for it.
And was
bankrupted.
Was raped by the European
financially
nations.
Raped. Yeah,
yes.
It was awful.
It was horrific. I mean, Woodrow Wilson, as much as I hate the guy's foreign policy or domestic, well, okay, I don't like him as a president in general. But for all the things I don't like. Well,
He was just a
Federal
shit guy.
Reserve.
I don't like it, but he had points. His 14 points for peace. One of his biggest ones was do not blame Germany. Don't take it all out on them. Just let everything go back to the way it was, for goodness sake. And that didn't work. And Hitler witnessed the financial destruction of his people.
My God, they just finished paying that back a few years ago.
Only in like 2008, I believe, 2008, 9, 10, whatever. And I think he had more of a Magneto mindset. Like you said, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. And I think we can all agree that Adolf Hitler was a terrorist. But to him, to himself, and to many other people around him,
He was a freedom fighter.
he was.
For the freedom of the German people.
As much as Benito Mussolini, as much was Vladimir Lenin.
Does that make Himmler Toad?
I could totally see that. So the real question here is, who is Blob? I mean, I know the obvious choice would be Winston Churchill, but
And okay, so all this talk about religion and we focused it on these three characters. There's an important one, and I didn't think about it until Ben, you brought up kind of ISIS and the Islamic religion, and extremists over there. We forgot about Ms. Marvel, the first openly Islamic character in the Marvel
Kamala
universe.
Khan.
Kamala Khan, yeah. And her faith plays a huge part in who she is and how she operates as a character.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that initial run.
Oh God, it was brilliant.
Yeah, and the way they incorporated, that faith, and she is Pakistani, so there is also a background that is a little bit more, definitely more conservative when it comes to Islam as well. So it's very interesting to see that perspective kind of in place. But she's also a very Americanized character.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like I was a huge fan of one of the discussions she had with her imam when she's sort of having sort of this crisis, the identity crisis of what she should do with her powers.
Yeah.
And he kind of says, if you have the ability to help, you have to. I think it says a lot about the conflicts within that faith at this time. I think we've seen with Christianity, we have a very well documented history of the conflicts within our faith over the last 2,000 years. And this is just, I can only use this as an example since it's the one that I know. So, that I know best. But we've seen how Christianity has been abused and used for bad causes and for and for good things as well throughout history. So it's interesting to see. I was fascinated to see how you see sort of that particular faith. In a very Americanized setting used. So, I mean, that's my perspective. I was a huge fan of it. I mean, culturally, it's not the same as my culture, but it's pretty close.
I thought it was very respectfully done. And, you brought up the point that Kamala is very Americanized, so she's kind of got this dichotomy fighting, within her of her ancestry and her history and her faith that she was born into. But then on the flip side of it, what America is like as well, and I really enjoyed seeing that battle and that struggle play out. You see it throughout that entire first issue run. I mean, even all the way up to the end, when she meets Captain Marvel and, she's still struggling with it. She's still fighting back and forth with herself, I know I have the ability to help, but do I? And she's got all these things that have been ingrained in her that she's trying to, not really fighting against, but trying to figure out where all these different sides of her stand, and I thought that is what made Miss Marvel so brilliant as a character, and why, and I'm glad that they made her, they brought in her Muslim faith because, I mean, that's the story of our time right now, It's you can sit here, and I mean, I grew up in a Christian household and everything, and I can sit here and say America's God's country and blah, blah, blah you want. But the fact remains is that we have an issue of trying to figure out where a certain faith that has never really had a huge cultural importance on our country, where it stands now that it's having a huge cultural impact on our country, you know? And I thought it was very interesting and, you know, really cool to see.
Right, and I think it also sort of describes sort of like kind of what you were alluding to, Addy, which is the cultural shift and debate within the Muslim community of itself of like, what are we holding on to and what are we moving forward with? You know, Christianity has done a fairly good job of letting go of some of the things in the Old Testament specifically that like just don't apply to a modern culture. You know, some of the rules about eating and some of the rules about cutting your hair. And,
yeah.
Or even the type of cloth you could wear.
You know, my personal favorite, not being able to sit where your wife is menstruated.
Right, exactly.
I think that should just be a modern rule in general, though. Disgusting.
Because that's just gross.
Okay. I think what you end up with, like, what you see happening with you know, Muslims today, like they're debating like what to do. You know, how do we handle, like, how do we move our religion into the 21st century and make it relatable without giving up our core basic tenets of belief? But what do we need to hold on to? Because, you know, and there's two definite sides to this argument, you know, and you're seeing it played out on a global stage. To see that played out, you know, through Kamala is really interesting too. And again, it gives us a way to have these conversations. And the thing I like about Kamala is her specifically, out of everybody that we've talked to, her religion just gives her a framework of who she wants to be as a person.
Right.
And that's really, you know, when I look at religion and I look at spirituality and all the different things that, you know, go into play with that, like that's ultimately what I think it's there for. I think it's there to tell us a story of who we are supposed to be. And help us get there and to help us make that journey. Because life is confusing and difficult, and there's all sorts of distractions and different things that you can do. You know, the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want, sort of, especially as an American. But who are you going to be in that process? I think that religion allows us, and spirituality allows us to kind of figure that out outside of ourselves, so we don't have to make the mistakes ourselves. And it allows us to kind of move through life in that regard. And I think Kamala is really, out of everybody that we discussed, the most adept at doing that. And she's the one who's the most mature spiritually in that process of like, okay, like I believe this and it's part of who I am, but it doesn't necessarily define everything that I am. And I think that's an important distinction for her versus everybody else that we've talked
Well, and
about.
I think that distinction stems from the fact that, you know, the other three characters that we talked about, you know, have been around for decades. You know, I mean, even when they get reborn with a new origin story, you know, they're still starting in a different generation. They're still starting in a different mindset culturally,
And they're reminiscent of who they were, but, you know, they always tend to adapt to what is going on in the world at the time. And I think Marvel has done a very good job of that. I'm not going to sit here and bag on DC, but I think Marvel has done the best job of resurrecting their characters, I think, in some ways when people need them most.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. I think that they've made more relatable characters more relatable every time that they retell their story.
And even now with the huge reboots, the all new, all different,
and post Secret Wars.
Yeah, the post Secret Wars reboot was just it was crazy. I mean, everything was different. Yeah, I would say that the only thing I didn't like out of it was Spider-Mom, but that's just me.
I love how the point of Secret Wars was to get rid of all the stupid parallel universes, but they came out with more stupid parallel universes than they went in with.
I'm just so tired of events like that.
I know.
Yeah, events aren't good. Just tell stories.
Why can't
Well,
life
it depends
be
on the
boring?
event, but the cosmic changing events.
Yeah.
Just
Why can't the Avengers just meet up in a coffee shop and have like a book club or something?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I want a slice of life series about the Avengers, like in between major world changing events.
You know, at some point, Deadpool has probably written fan fiction for all like the Avengers and like what they do on their days off.
Okay, somebody needs to write a fan fiction about Deadpool writing fan fiction.
Well, didn't we just have a series with Vision, just like his home life or something?
It was like he
That's
like
true.
created his own wife and kids.
Right.
All visions.
Yeah, it was really creepy.
It was so weird.
Oh man, that was a strange situation.
The only way that entire series could have been redeemed is if at the very end it was Deadpool writing that as a series.
I don't know,
As like a fan fiction ode to Vision.
I don't know, or Wanda just comes home and is like, "Hey, honey, what the hell? What?
Oh, hey, I'm Dr. Manhattan now. Sorry. I can make things. I can make life
Oh my
out of
god.
thin air.
It could
Yeah.
happen. It could totally happen. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate you guys being on our show.
Yeah, thanks
Dude,
for
this
having
has
us.
been fun.
This is a
been
blast.
Awesome. Holy crap.
Thank you guys. Let's do it again.
Yes, let's make this a regular occurrence, I think.
I like this.
It gives us more opportunities for Colin to say how much he hates me and us to say how big of an asshole and a dick Ben is.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what?
Anytime we can.
It gets me out there because it allows me to talk with people that aren't Jeff here. So
Wow.
So it's just positive for your social life.
it is. It really is for my sanity.
Fuck all of you.
It's like I'm just sitting here in a straitjacket.
I hate you.
And I've been freed by Ben and
Even
Addy.
when we're on somebody else's show, I always have an I hate you moment.
I do what I can. I'm reliable. What can I say? I'm consistent. Anyways, sorry we jacked your
Thank you guys
ending.
so much for having us. We really had a great time.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. Don't forget you can join in on the discussion at any time. Just go to our website, certainpov.com. And while you're there, check out Patreon. Be sure to share our podcast. See what you would like to do as part of the podcast, part of our Nerf herder, our group of Nerf herders, our fellow friends and nerds. All of that again on our website, certainpov.com. And until next week, stay scruffy, my Nerf herders.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. Head over to certainpov.com.